Imagine a trap so perfectly designed that, well, whether you say yes or no, you die.
Yeah, literally.
Like, that is not an exaggeration.
Yeah.
We're talking about a scenario where every single possible answer leads directly to your own execution.
It's the absolute definition of a rigged system.
Right. Usually when we think about a legal trial, there is this expectation of, clean lines. You have a judge, a jury, a defense, and a prosecution.
Sure, yeah.
The facts are laid out, the judge points to the law, and a verdict is rendered. We like things to be visible and neatly categorized.
But that is not what happens here.
No, not at all. You step into the courts of first-century Jerusalem, and suddenly that clean legal process is just shattered. We are looking at a judicial landscape that is murky, corrupt, and incredibly lethal.
Because what we see in the historical record is not a pursuit of justice. It is a calculated, premeditated conspiracy, basically masquerading as a righteous prosecution.
Welcome to Reformed Thinking. I am so glad you were joining us today. If you are listening to this right now, you are stepping into a massive deep dive of one of the most famous narratives in the entire biblical text.
And honestly, one of the most misunderstood.
Oh, completely. We are unpacking the story of the woman caught in adultery, which is found in the Gospel of John, chapter 7, verse 53, through chapter 8, verse 11.
Right.
And our mission today is to completely shatter the common Sunday school reduction of this story.
Yes, please. Because, you have probably heard this taught as a simple moral tale about being nice and not judging people.
Which is such a massive reduction.
It really is. That reading completely misses the reality of what is actually happening.
Yeah. What we are looking at is a high-stakes, geopolitically charged legal ambush. It is a literal life-or-death trap set for Jesus of Nazareth by the religious elite of his day.
To grasp the absolute brilliance of what happens in this temple court, you really have to look at the event through the cultural lens of first-century Middle Eastern jurisprudence. We have to understand honor and shame dynamics. We have to look at the legal structures of the ancient Near East, the overlapping jurisdictions of Roman and Jewish law.
Which is huge.
Huge. And the strict evidentiary standards of the time. When you do that, the whole scene shifts from a private counseling session into a massive public confrontation with the highest possible stakes.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we get into the trap itself, we have to address the textual elephant in the room.
Oh, yes.
The brackets. The brackets. Some people open their Bibles, they find John chapter 7 and 8, and they see this entire passage enclosed in brackets.
Right, or there is a little footnote.
Yeah, footnote saying, the earliest manuscripts do not include these verses. If you are a listener who likes to know that the text you're reading is reliable, that footnote can be really unsettling. What is going on there?
That is a critical point to clarify right at the start. It is well known in textual scholarship that this narrative is absent from some of the earliest Greek manuscripts we have discovered. For instance, there is a manuscript called Papyrus 66.
Wait, let's pause on that. What is Papyrus 66? Explain that like I am 5 years old.
Sure. So Papyrus 66 is essentially an ancient scrap of paper. It is a near-complete codex or ancient book of the Gospel of John found in Egypt, dating back to around the year 200 AD.
So it is very old.
Extremely old. It is one of the oldest physical copies of John's Gospel we possess. And in that specific document, this story is missing.
Really?
Yeah. The text jumps straight from John 7.52 to John 8.2.
Wow.
And the same thing happens in another famous manuscript called Codex Sinaiticus, which is a complete Greek New Testament from the 4th century.
Okay, so that is why the brackets are there.
Right. Because of these omissions, some modern critical translations put the text in brackets, and some academic scholars argue it was a later addition by a scribe.
So if the earliest physical scraps of paper we have do not include this story, why is it in our Bibles today? Why should we trust it?
Because the church has long read, defended, and preserved this passage for very specific reasons, we recognize that by singular care and divine providence, this text has been kept pure across the ages.
Yeah.
Even though it is missing in a few early Greek fragments, it shows up very early in the Latin Vulgate, which was translated by Jerome in the late 300s.
Okay, so Jerome had it.
He did. Jerome had access to Greek manuscripts that we no longer have today, and he included it because it was widespread in the Greek texts he possessed.
That makes sense.
It is also found in the vast majority of the Byzantine text-type manuscripts, which represent the bulk of the historical copying tradition of the church.
So it is not like somebody just invented a story out of thin air in the Middle Ages.
No, not at all.
It has ancient roots, even if a few specific copies left it out. But why would early scribes leave it out?
The early church father Augustine actually offered a fascinating theory about this.
Oh, really? What did he say?
He suggested that some early Christian scribes intentionally removed the story from their copies because they were afraid it made Jesus look too soft on the sin of adultery.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. The early church was dealing with intense moral standards, and some leaders might have feared that this text would give people license to sin.
They were trying to protect the morality of the church.
Right. So the omission might not be because the story did not happen, but because early copyists were just uncomfortable with the radical nature of the grace it displayed.
That makes total sense. And when you actually analyze the theology of the passage, it is not strange to the Gospels. It aligns perfectly with everything else John writes.
It really does.
It presents a flawless synthesis of holy justice and sovereign grace. It harmonizes completely with the Christ who, exposes hypocrisy, protects the vulnerable, and commands real repentance.
It is far too brilliant, consistent, and spiritually piercing to be the product of human fabrication.
Yeah, you could make this up.
No later scribe inventing a story would be able to construct a legal trap this sophisticated, nor would they invent a resolution that so perfectly balances the strict demands of the Mosaic law with the provision of unearned mercy.
That is incredibly helpful context. Let us move into the actual historical situation. We call this a geopolitical crossfire.
Yes.
To understand why this confrontation is so lethal, we first have to examine the legal trap the religious leaders constructed. You mentioned overlapping jurisdictions. What is the historical reality of Roman occupation in Judea at this time? Set the scene for us.
Well, you have to go back a little bit to the year 6 AD. Following the death of Herod the Great, his son Archelaus took over.
Right.
And Archelaus was so incompetent, so brutal, and caused so much unrest that the Jewish people actually sent a delegation to Augustus Caesar in Rome, begging him to remove Archelaus and just rule them directly.
Wow, they asked for direct Roman rule.
They did. Augustus agreed. He banished Archelaus and instituted a system where Judea was governed directly by Roman prefects and procurators.
Pontius Pilate being the most famous one later on.
Spot on. But this foreign colonial administration introduced a massive jurisdictional tension.
How so?
When Rome took direct control, they instituted a very specific policy to maintain their absolute dominance. The Roman Empire stripped the native Jewish judicial body, the Sanhedrin, of the right to execute capital punishment. In Latin legal terms, this is known as the jus gladii, the right of the sword. The authority to carry out the death penalty was reserved strictly for the Roman governor.
So the local Jewish courts could handle minor disputes, maybe property issues or minor religious infractions. But if someone was going to be put to death, Rome had to sign the execution order.
That is the reality. The Jerusalem Talmud, which is a collection of ancient rabbinic writings, and the Gospel of John itself confirm this restriction.
Okay.
Later in John's Gospel, the Jewish leaders explicitly tell Pilate, "It is not lawful for us to put anyone to death." They knew the boundaries of their authority.
Okay, so Rome holds the sword. But standing in sharp contrast to this Roman restriction was the unyielding standard of the Mosaic covenant.
Right.
If you go back to the Old Testament, Leviticus chapter 20, verse 10, and Deuteronomy chapter 22, verse 22, the law required death for both parties when adultery was established.
Yes.
It was a capital offense against the holiness of the land and the covenant with God.
So now you see the tension. Moses commands execution for this crime. Rome forbids execution without their explicit permission.
It is like a local municipality trying to override a supreme federal mandate.
Yeah, that is a good way to put it.
The local law says one thing, but the federal occupying force says the complete opposite. And the Pharisees are weaponizing this tension to force a constitutional crisis.
Exactly.
They bring this woman to Jesus and say, Moses says stone her. What do you say? They're creating a binary trap.
It is a devastating dilemma. If Jesus says stone her, he is acting as a political insurgent inciting a lynch mob.
He violates Roman law.
He does. And giving the religious authorities immediate grounds to run to the Roman prefect and say, "This man is usurping the authority of Caesar. Arrest him for sedition."
Which would end his ministry and lead to his death at the hands of the Romans.
But look at the alternative. If he says, "Let her go, we cannot stone her because Rome forbids it," he is immediately branded a theological heretic.
Right.
The leaders would turn to the Jewish crowds and say, "Look at this so-called prophet. He dismisses Moses. He dismisses the moral standards of Yahweh. He compromises with the pagan Romans."
He loses the crowds completely. If he chooses Moses, he dies by the sword of Rome. If he chooses Rome, he is discredited and destroyed by the religious zeal of the Jewish people. How could anyone escape that binary?
The religious leaders believed it was an inescapable dilemma. They were using the zeal of the populace for the Old Testament law as a mechanism of social and political control.
They thought they had him.
They thought they had finally outsmarted him, but their entire setup, their own prosecution, had a glaring flaw that they hoped nobody would notice in the heat of the moment.
Which brings us to the actual mechanics of the trial. Tell us about the evidentiary standards required by Jewish law for a case like this, because it was not as simple as just suspecting someone of doing something wrong.
Oh, no. Under rabbinic evidentiary standards, which were developed to protect people from false accusations, securing a conviction for a capital crime like adultery required an extraordinarily high threshold.
Like what?
You needed at least 2 independent adult male eyewitnesses, and they could not just testify that they saw the couple walking into a room together. They had to see the actual physical act taking place.
That seems incredibly difficult to prove.
Yeah.
How do 2 independent witnesses accidentally stumble upon that specific moment?
It gets even more stringent. According to the Mishnah, the witnesses also had to warn the participants of the legal consequences immediately prior to the act.
Wait, hold on.
Yeah.
They had to warn them before the act.
Yes. They had to say, if you do this, you will be committing a capital crime and will be stoned. And the couple had to acknowledge the warning and proceed anyway.
And the couple had to say, we hear you, but we're going to do it anyway.
That was the law.
That means a spontaneous discovery was practically impossible. You do not just accidentally walk in, issue a legal warning, get a verbal confirmation, and then watch the crime happen.
Right.
They had to have been watching. They had to have orchestrated the environment. It was a setup from the very beginning.
It was entirely a setup. The logistical requirements of the law make it impossible for this to be a random morning patrol that just happened to catch a crime in progress.
Oh, way.
The witnesses were lying in wait. And that leads to the most obvious, screaming question in the entire narrative.
Right. If she was caught in the very act, if they saw the whole thing happen, where is the man?
It takes 2 people to commit adultery. Under Mosaic law, both the man and the woman were explicitly ordered to be put to death.
Both of them.
The omission of the male party completely undermines the legitimacy of their prosecution. It demonstrates selective enforcement of the law.
It is so corrupt.
It suggests malicious manipulation, likely involving a corrupt backroom deal. The man might have been part of the conspiracy, or they simply let him go because he was not useful to their political aims.
They care nothing for the woman's soul. They care nothing for the purity of Israel. If they cared about the law, they would have brought the man too.
They are utilizing a human being, an image bearer of God, as nothing more than a human battering ram to destroy a young Galilean rabbi who is threatening their power structure.
It is horrifying when you think about it. The sheer callousness,
Yeah.
the psychological trauma they are inflicting on this woman just to win a theological argument.
It is the terrifying reality of human depravity manifesting through religious self-righteousness.
Wow.
This is what happens when people use the outward letter of the law to secure personal dominance while completely bypassing justice, mercy, and faith. They view themselves as the defenders of God's truth while simultaneously breaking the most fundamental ethical commands regarding how to treat their neighbor.
Because the trial was a setup. The physical location and the cultural environment where it takes place become crucial weapons for the accusers.
Yes.
This brings us to the optics of shame in the temple court. Let us talk about the spatial dynamics of this scene. If you look at the end of John chapter 7 compared to the beginning of John chapter 8, the contrast is staggering.
Yes, the spatial contrast has a lot of theological significance. At the end of John 7, there is a fierce debate among the Jewish leaders about who Jesus is. And the text notes that after the debate, everyone went to their own home.
Okay.
The religious leaders retreat to their private, secure, comfortable residences. They have shelter, they have status. Meanwhile, the text says Jesus went to the Mount of Olives.
I want to pause there because the Mount of Olives is not just a random hill with some trees on it.
No, it is not.
If you know your Old Testament, specifically Zechariah chapter 14, the Mount of Olives is a highly prophetic site. It is the place where the glory of God departed from the temple in Ezekiel's vision, and it is the place where the Messiah is prophesied to stand when he brings final judgment and redemption.
That is a brilliant connection.
Yeah.
Jesus is positioning himself geographically in alignment with prophetic expectation. And then the text says, early in the morning, at dawn, he returns to the public spaces of the temple.
Right.
He sits down, which was the formal, authoritative posture of a rabbi in that era, and he begins to teach the crowds. He is asserting his absolute right to instruct Israel within the very courts of the temple, the epicenter of Jewish religious life.
So you have this peaceful, authoritative scene. The sun is coming up, the crowds are gathered, Jesus is teaching, and then comes the violent interruption.
Yeah.
The scribes and Pharisees shatter the instructional piece. They drag this woman into the area. And the text uses a very specific phrase. It says they placed her in the midst. They put her right in the center of the circle.
To understand the cruelty of that action, we have to talk about the culture. In a first-century Middle Eastern honor-shame society, morality is not just an individual private matter.
No, it's communal.
It is deeply tied to the collective honor of the family, the village, and the entire community. Placing this woman in the center is an act of maximum public exposure.
Wow.
In that world, shame was not a minor feeling of embarrassment. Shame was a social death. To be accused publicly of a severe moral failing was to be permanently diminished before your family, your neighbors, and the worshiping community. It meant total ostracization.
I try to think about how to translate that to our modern context. It's almost like modern digital public shaming, but with lethal physical consequences.
It's a chilling comparison.
This isn't just a tough cross-examination in a closed courtroom.
Yeah.
Dragging her into the center of the temple is the ancient equivalent of doxing someone.
Oh.
It is leaking their most shameful secrets, their worst possible moments, to millions of followers online, and watching the internet form a mob to destroy their life. Except here, the mob is not holding smartphones. They are holding literal, jagged rocks meant to crush her chest.
That analogy captures the terror perfectly. They are weaponizing her shattered honor to put Jesus on the defensive. Notice that they do not approach Jesus in a private room for careful, pastoral, legal counsel.
No, of course not.
If they genuinely wanted to know the right interpretation of the law, they could have sent a delegation to speak with him privately. Instead, they stage a public test before a massive audience, turning a moral case into a political ambush.
They identify her entirely by her sin. They never use her name. They speak about her to Jesus while she is standing right there, but they never speak to her.
She is just a prop.
A real human being is reduced to a theological playing card so that these men can protect their own religious status.
The accusers here represent a dead, hypocritical religious system. They possess the law, they know the law, but they do not possess the spirit of the lawgiver.
Yeah.
They are completely devoid of compassion.
So Jesus is confronted with a screaming mob, a terrified woman in the center of the circle, and an airtight political trap. The tension in this moment must have been suffocating.
Unbearable.
But Jesus does not respond on their terms. He refuses to play the game by the rules they have set. He changes the terms of the engagement entirely through a stunning physical action. Let us look at the sovereign shield of silence and dust.
If you analyze the narrative structure of this passage, John writes it using a highly organized literary arrangement called a chiasm.
Okay, another big term. What is a chiasm?
Think of it like a literary sandwich.
Yep.
The author presents a series of ideas, let's call them A, B, and C, and then he reverses the order, C, B, A. The goal of this structure is to draw the reader's attention to the center, the meat of the sandwich. In this story, everything builds toward the middle. And what is fascinating is that the structural climax of this entire narrative is not a spoken word.
It is an action.
It is silence. Jesus stoops down and writes on the ground with his finger.
This is the part of the story that drives everybody crazy. Everyone always speculates about what he wrote in the dirt. Did he write the secret sins of the Pharisees? Did he write their names? Did he write specific Bible verses?
Right, there are so many theories.
I have heard a dozen different sermons guessing what the actual words were. But maybe we are asking the wrong question. What is the significance of the act of writing itself, regardless of the specific letters?
To answer that, we have to look at the specific Greek verb used by the Apostle John. The text uses the word katagraphe.
Okay.
Now, the common, everyday Greek word for writing is just graphe. That is where we get the word graph or graphics. But katagraph is a compound word, and it carries a very specific judicial nuance in classical Greek literature.
What does it mean?
It means to officially register an indictment. It means to write down a formal legal charge or to record a criminal sentence in a court of law.
Wait, so he is not just absent-mindedly doodling in the sand to pass the time or avoid making eye contact?
Not at all. He is acting as a judge. In the Roman legal system, a magistrate would often write down the sentence on a wax tablet before reading it aloud to the court.
Wow.
By using this specific verb, John is communicating that Jesus is drafting a formal legal counter-indictment. It is a visual, physical enactment of divine judgment. He lowers himself, He delays the screaming mob, and he turns the atmosphere of the courtyard from chaotic accusation to heavy, terrifying conscience.
That is so powerful.
In an oral public culture, silence can be far stronger and more intimidating than speech. His stooping breaks the frantic rhythm of their trap.
And there are massive Old Testament covenantal echoes happening here too, right? Because if you are a Jewish scholar in the first century and you see someone writing with their finger, your mind immediately goes to specific places in the Hebrew scriptures.
Absolutely. The connections are staggering. Think about the Exodus. The only other time God is explicitly described as writing with his finger is the giving of the Ten Commandments at Mount Sinai.
Yeah.
God wrote the law on tablets of stone with his own finger. By writing with his finger in the temple, Jesus is visually claiming the authority of the original lawgiver.
That is incredible.
Furthermore, there is a direct prophetic link to Jeremiah chapter 17, verse 13. That verse declares, "O Lord, the hope of Israel, all who forsake you shall be put to shame. Those who turn away from you shall be written in the earth, for they have forsaken the Lord, the fountain of living water."
That is unbelievable. Those who turn away from you shall be written in the earth.
Yeah.
By writing in the dust of the temple court, Jesus is visually identifying himself as the Yahweh of Jeremiah 17. He is officially registering the apostasy and the rebellion of the religious leader standing right in front of him.
Spot on.
And on a practical human level, think about what this action does in the room. He absorbs the hostile gaze of the crowd. He pulls their eyes away from the exposed, purified womb and forces them to look at his sovereign authority. He provides her with a protective boundary of silence.
He refuses to be rushed by the theatrical urgency of his opponents. They're trying to force a panic reaction, but he operates from a higher court. He takes absolute control of the pacing of the trial.
Okay, so he has established his judicial authority in the dust. The silence has done its work. Now Jesus stands up to deliver a verbal verdict, and this legal counterstrike completely dismantles the accuser's trap. He looks at them and says the famous line, "Let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone at her."
And this is where modern readers often go completely off track and misunderstand the entire point of the passage.
Right, because people today hear that phrase, and they use it as a blanket statement to mean, look, nobody is perfect, we all make mistakes, therefore nobody has the right to ever judge anyone else for anything.
Yeah, you hear that everywhere.
It is used to shut down any kind of moral accountability. But if you think about it logically, that interpretation would invalidate all human court systems. If a judge or a jury member has to be perfectly sinless in every aspect of their life to pass a sentence, every prison would be empty tomorrow. Society would collapse. That cannot be what Jesus means.
It is not what he means at all. We have to examine the original language again. The Greek word translated without sin is anamartotos. It is a very rare word. In fact, it occurs only here in the entire New Testament.
Really?
Yes. To understand what Jesus is demanding, we have to look at the specific judicial context of the Old Testament law they are trying to invoke. If we look at Deuteronomy chapter 17, verse 7, the law states that in an execution, the hands of the witnesses must be the first to put the person to death. The witnesses had to throw the first stones.
They had to take personal physical responsibility for the execution they were demanding. You could not just make an accusation and walk away. You had to look the person in the eye and cast the boulder that would end their life.
Correct. But Deuteronomy chapter 19 adds a massive caveat to this. It deals with malicious or false witnesses. The law states that if a witness is found to be false, or if they conspired to commit judicial murder, the judges are to do to that witness exactly what they intended to do to the accused.
Meaning, if you lie to get someone stoned, you get stoned instead. The penalty rebounds onto your own head.
Yes. So when Jesus uses the word anamartotos in this specific courtroom setting, he is not asking if they have ever told a lie when they were 6 years old.
Right.
He is asking a highly targeted legal question. He is asking if they are free from complicity in the specific crime. He is asking if they are free from false witness and free from malicious perjury. He knows this is a setup.
He is calling their bluff. He is invoking the strict terms of Moses. He is essentially saying, okay, you want to follow the law of Moses, let us follow it perfectly. We will execute this woman. But the witnesses have to go first. Let the man among you who is not part of this corrupt conspiracy, the man who is completely clean of orchestrating this trap, step forward and throw the first stone. But know this, if you throw that stone and I expose your conspiracy, you will be the next one executed for perjury, according to Deuteronomy 19.
That is the brilliance of the counterstrike. He does not lower the bar of holy justice. He raises it. He demands that the executioners be qualified under the strict spiritual and legal terms of the covenant. He turns the prosecuting attorneys into the defendants.
And that causes a total psychological collapse among the leaders. The conviction of sin radiates through the crowd. Jesus pierces their conscience without ever granting them a legal or political excuse to condemn him.
Which is amazing.
He doesn't say, "Don't stone her," which saves him from the Romans. And he doesn't say, "Stone her," which saves him from the crowd. He says, "You stone her if you meet the legal requirements." And none of them do.
The text notes a very specific, fascinating detail about what happens next. It says that when they heard it, they went away one by one, beginning with the older men.
I have always wondered about that. Why do the older men leave first? Is it just because they have lived longer and have more sins to remember?
Well, while they certainly have longer track records of sin, the sociological explanation is much more compelling. This is explained perfectly through ancient village dynamics.
How so?
In a patriarchal, honor-driven society, the elders carry the highest social status. They are the ones who sit at the city gates. They have the greatest community honor and the responsibility for maintaining public order.
Okay, I see where this is going.
But because they hold the highest status, they also have the most to lose in a public shaming.
Oh, I see. If a young guy gets embarrassed, he can recover. If the respected village elder gets exposed as a corrupt fraud in front of the whole town, his life is over.
Precisely. When Jesus issues his challenge, the elders possess the wisdom and the life experience to instantly realize they have been outmaneuvered. Their rigged trial is unmasked. If they stay in that circle, if they try to pick up a stone and call his bluff, Jesus will publicly expose their hypocrisy, their backroom deals, and their law-breaking. To save face, to preserve whatever shred of dignity they have left, they drop their stones and quietly slip away.
And the younger men, who naturally look to the elders for leadership and cues on how to behave, suddenly realize their leaders are abandoning the field. They have no choice but to follow.
Right.
It is a domino effect of retreating pride. The prosecution simply evaporates. The trap completely fails. Because without the witnesses, there is no trial. No one remains to press the capital charge.
The trial fails, not because the sin of adultery is innocent or harmless, but because the accusers cannot lawfully proceed. The hostile mob dissolves back into the city.
Which leaves a radical shift in the spatial dynamics of the scene.
Yeah.
The public theater accusation, the screaming mob, the threatening rocks, it all vanishes. It becomes a private sanctuary of divine absolution.
It really does.
The text says they are left alone. Just Jesus and the woman. I love the way the ancient theologian Augustine described this exact moment. He wrote in Latin, "Relicti sunt duo, misera et misericordia."
Two were left, misery and mercy. The woman has moved from the terrifying center of a bloodthirsty mob directly into the quiet presence of the Savior. The contrast is breathtaking.
It was a beautiful scene. But as much as we love the emotional resolution of that moment, it raises a massive theological challenge.
Okay, let's hear.
If we believe that God is perfectly holy, and we believe that his law is absolutely just, he cannot just sweep covenant breaking under the rug with a sentimental, "I don't condemn you." Human judges go to jail for doing that.
They absolutely do.
If a judge lets a guilty criminal walk free just because he feels sorry for them, we call that judge corrupt. How can Jesus let her go without violating God's justice? The law of adultery requires death. You cannot just ignore that without making God an unjust judge.
This brings us to the very heart of the Christian gospel. This is the core of substitutionary atonement. The question you just asked is the central problem of the Bible. How can a just God forgive a guilty sinner without compromising his immutable, unchanging justice? The penalty for cosmic treason must be paid. Sin cannot be ignored. It must be punished.
So how does Jesus resolve it here?
By looking at who is left in the room, Jesus is the only anamartudos, the only truly sinless one in the temple that day.
He is the only one who qualifies.
Yes. As the incarnate Son of God, he's the only one who has perfectly kept the law. Therefore, he alone possesses the absolute moral and legal right to pick up a stone and execute the divine sentence upon this woman. He is the true judge.
You have the right to throw the stone. He's not disqualified. So why does he refuse to throw it? Why does he say, "Neither do I condemn you"?
Because he came to be stoned in her place. He does not throw the stone at her because he knows that in just a short amount of time, he will walk outside the city gates to a hill called Calvary.
Yeah.
And on the cross, Jesus will absorb the full, concentrated weight of the divine wrath that this woman's sin and the total rebellion of the human heart rightfully deserved.
That is the great exchange.
Yes. The stones of divine justice that should have shattered her body will instead fall upon the Son of God. He takes her shame, her guilt, and her condemnation, and he freely gives her his perfect, active righteousness.
It is incredible.
He does not forgive her by pretending her sin is light or irrelevant. He forgives her because he fully intends to bear the curse for his people. This is the mechanism of grace. This is how God remains completely just because the sin is punished in Christ, while simultaneously pardoning the guilty sinner who stands before him. The wrath falls on the substitute.
That completely changes how you read, "Neither do I condemn you." It is not a dismissal of the crime. It is the assumption of the penalty.
Correctly.
So, having established the mechanics of her pardon, the text moves to the direct instruction Jesus gives the woman for her future. He clarifies the relationship between grace and obedience. He says to her, "Neither do I condemn you, go. And from now on, sin no more."
That single sentence contains judicial restraint, personal mercy, and a firm moral command. He condemns her sin by commanding its immediate end, but he saves the sinner.
It is so fascinating to look at the grammatical order of what Jesus says there. He puts the pardon before the command.
Right, the order matters.
He doesn't say, "Go, stop sinning, get your life together, prove to me that you can be pure for 6 months, and if you succeed, that I won't condemn you." He pronounces the absolute pardon first, while she is still standing there in the dust of her failure.
This is the essential order of biblical grace. Pardon precedes purity. In theological terms, justification fuels sanctification.
Right.
He does not set up a new covenant of works where she has to earn her release or maintain her forgiveness through her own moral effort. The grace of God acts as the very catalyst that empowers radical obedience. Knowing you are loved and forgiven when you deserve to be crushed is the only thing that can actually change the human heart.
So what does this mean for the pardoned believer's relationship to the law? If we are entirely forgiven, does the law even matter anymore?
This perfectly illustrates what theologians call the third use of the law. For the pardoned believer, the law is no longer a terrifying instrument of condemnation. Christ has forever silenced the condemning voice of the law at the cross.
Okay, that makes sense.
However, the law still has a vital purpose. It functions as a loving guide for a holy life. Notice that Jesus does not minimize the evil of adultery. He validates the seventh commandment when he tells her to sin no more.
He doesn't say the law was wrong.
Not at all. He establishes that free grace is never a license for licentiousness or reckless living. The pardoned sinner is sovereignly equipped by the Holy Spirit and commanded to walk in a brand new way of life that honors the God who saved them.
The historical and theological realities of this passage speak directly to us today. Because human nature has not changed since the first century. We see the exact same errors plaguing modern culture and modern religious circles.
We really do.
Let us look at these modern echoes. We tend to fall off the horse on one side or the other.
The first major error we see today is the antinomian extreme.
Antinomian literally meaning against the law, right?
That is correct. We see this heavily in progressive, seeker-sensitive movements that often hijack this very text to support unconditional affirmation of behaviors the Bible clearly calls sin.
That happens a lot.
They love to quote, "Neither do I condemn you." They cast Jesus as this highly empathetic, non-judgmental therapist who just wants to validate people in whatever lifestyle choices they make. They use this story to argue that love requires us to abandon moral standards.
But to do that, they have to amputate the second half of the sentence. They cut off "go and sin no more."
They do.
They offer a version of forgiveness that requires zero repentance.
Yeah.
And the tragedy of that is that this kind of cheap grace actually abandons people to the destructive consequences of their own actions. It leaves them trapped in the misery of their sin, just slapping a smiley face sticker on their bondage and calling it freedom.
Christ saves by grace, and he sanctifies by truth. Grace does not baptize our bondage, it breaks it. True love does not leave a person in the fire, it pulls them out.
But on the other side of the spectrum, conservative circles often fall into the Pharisaic extreme. We see intense legalism and moralism. People who know the Bible well are often the most eager to drag others into the digital town square to expose their failures.
Yes.
We use people's mistakes to score tribal points, to prove that our theological camp is superior to theirs.
The total depravity of the scribes is a horrifying mirror for anyone who uses biblical standards to destroy theological opponents while remaining entirely blind to their own internal rot.
It's a huge warning.
Selective outrage is not righteousness. It is just weaponized pride. Before confronting another person's sin, we must ask if our own hands are clean of malice. We must drop our stones of pride. If our confrontation is not aimed at restoration, we are acting like the Pharisees, not like Christ.
So let's pull all of this together. We have covered a massive amount of ground today. This narrative is an absolute masterclass in divine wisdom. Look at what Jesus accomplishes in just a few agonizingly tense minutes.
It's stunning.
He completely subverts a hostile, geopolitically lethal political setup. He exposes the deep hypocrisy of the religious elites without violating the law. He upholds the absolute unbending standard of God's holy justice. And at the very same time, he offers a costly, blood-bought pardon to a broken, terrified sinner.
Yeah.
He acts as the true judge who discerns the heart, the true prophet who speaks the word of God, and the merciful priest who provides the atonement.
He refuses to be owned or categorized by legalists, antinomians, or political calculators. He governs the chaotic scene with absolute sovereign calm. He protects the vulnerable from unlawful attack, and he names sin accurately without ever using the sinner as a trophy of religious power.
Which leaves us with a final consideration for you, the listener, because the reality of this text is that you cannot remain a neutral bystander in this temple court. You are in the narrative. You are either holding a stone of self-righteousness, eager to condemn someone else, while remaining completely blind to your own guilt and your own desperate need for grace. Or you are standing empty-handed in the center of the circle. You are the one exposed, and you are looking into the eyes of the only one in the universe qualified to throw a stone at you, hearing him offer you completely unearned, life-altering pardon. You step into those muddy waters of justice and mercy, and the real question is revealed. The stones are on the ground. The verdict has been written. Which side of the dust will you stand on today?